Good morning and welcome to assembly number 9. Now this assembly is going to be slightly different in that we're not going to focus on the lockdown and the virus and all that sort of thing. Essentially what I'd like to do is tell you a story about someone who you might not know. However, before that, one thing I will say is that there have been questions about how much work you should be doing and how much time you should be spending on that work. So at the end of this assembly I'll display on the screen for each year group what you should be doing for each subject and how long you should be spending on it. Okay, so I want to tell you today about someone who I think is quite inspirational. I want to talk about someone who you may not have heard of, but who has had an enormous impact on pretty much every day of your life. And it's this person. This is Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was a film star in the 1930s and 40s. Now don't worry, this is not an assembly where I try to convince you to watch lots of black and white films, although you should. Her films are not particularly well remembered, but as an icon of cinema she is quite well remembered. The fact that she was a film star is not the most important part of her story. However, she was in her time an enormous star, and she was considered to be one of the most beautiful women on earth.
Well, I could tell you, and in great sincerity, that you're one of the two most beautiful women I've ever met.
Who's the other?
In fact, she was the inspiration behind the design for Disney's Snow White and for DC's first version of Catwoman. Now, we all love a bit of Disney, but that's not why she's changed your everyday life. So she was born in Austria and she emigrated to America, and when she went to America she became a movie star. When she was a little girl in Vienna, her father would take her on long walks, and as they did so he would point out to her certain things. He would point out to her things like the traffic signals or the electronic tram system, and he would explain to her how they worked. He was an engineer, and so she had a lifelong fascination with engineering, with science and technology. And in her spare time, when she wasn't making films, she was at home in her lab inventing things, crazy things. Now, at one point she met a man called Howard Hughes, who was a famous film producer and director and a famous aviation engineer. He was a bit of an adventurer in his day. He was trying to design the fastest aeroplane in the world. And in fact, Howard Hughes is the inspiration for Howard Stark from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as you can see. He and Hedy Lamarr had a relationship. He was aware of her engineering interest and he encouraged her to come up with ideas. One of the ideas that she had, a great idea, was about how to make aeroplanes go faster. So she noticed that the fastest fish and the fastest birds had a similar shape or outline, and that if this was transferred to the wings of aeroplanes, then the aerodynamics would make the aeroplanes go faster, as she says.
I thought the aeroplanes would too slow. I decided that's not right. They shouldn't be square, the wings. So I bought a book of fish and I bought a book of birds, and I used the fastest bird connected it with the fastest fish, and I drew it together and showed it to Howard Hughes, and I said, "You're a genius."
But that's not how she's affected your life every single day, because we don't fly every day. At the beginning of the Second World War, although America was not yet fighting, they were sending lots of food and resources to Europe on ships over the Atlantic Ocean. The problem is that the Nazis had U-boats. They had submarines that were incredibly effective and very, very difficult to combat. And in fact, on one tragic occasion, there was a ship that was torpedoed by a German U-boat and sank, killing lots of children. Now, Hedy Lamarr saw this and she wanted to do something about it. The British warships did have torpedoes that were radio controlled, so you could direct where they were going so they would hit the submarine. The problem is that the Germans were very effective in jamming the radio-controlled signal, so the torpedoes from the British ships would just miss. Hedy Lamarr was aware that the radio-controlled torpedoes worked on the radio spectrum, and that they used a very, very short part of that radio wave spectrum.
I was afraid you wouldn't understand.
I will try to explain this, but it is complicated. So, during discussions with a composer that she knew called George Antheil, who is most famous for writing the music for an incredibly important film called Ballet Mécanique, George Antheil showed her what's called a pianola, which is a self-playing piano. So she had a moment of inspiration, a moment of genius. She worked out that if you could get the radio signal to hop from one point on the frequency to another, then the German U-boats, even if they jammed one section of the frequency, would not be able to send the message. This was essentially secure, encrypted communication.
Oh, my clever little man.
And it was called frequency hopping. Now that technology forms the basis of things we have today, such as Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, the fact that I can do this remote assembly, the fact that you have your mobile phones, the fact that you can watch TV, streaming TV, is all because of Hedy Lamarr's technical brilliance.